The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 501. Kiran wanted to find out who cast the love spell and why they did it. The chieftain wanted to know why the love spell was ineffective and who was responsible for this. Everyone else wanted to know how the love spell was made from the zombie spell. Every single person there was filled with questions. Why aren't you afraid of the love spell? Why does Yvonne feel pain, but you don't? The chieftain asked loudly in disbelief. You were the one who cast the spell. Don't you know? Kiran replied with another question. That's impossible, the chieftain insisted. Don't you see the facts right in front of you? What other proof do you need? Kiran continued asking. Yvonne, is there no poison in his body? The chieftain turned to Yvonne since Kiran refused to answer him. Yvonne was still weak but had recovered a little, so she whispered, Of course, he has the poison of the love spell in him. How else would he not be afraid of your black magic? Then why is this happening? The chieftain could not hide his surprise. He has the fatal poison in him, Yvonne explained. The fatal poison? The chieftain and everyone else were in shock. We cast the dual female love spell on him, and he's also under the threads of fate with someone else. Although he doesn't have complete control over the love spell, it's enough to guarantee that he won't die, Yvonne explained. How did we cast the dual female love spell? They didn't mention anything about that, the chieftain blurted in shock. Who is they? Kiran was furious when he heard that, so he asked the chieftain menacingly, putting him on the spot. Only then did the chieftain realize that he had said the wrong thing. Who cast the love spell? Yvonne asked. Fatal poison? The chieftain did not answer her, but he seemed to be deep in thought. Yvonne and Kiran simply stared at him. Humph! After a while, the chieftain snorted coldly. Fiona must have known about this for a long time. I thought I was plotting against her, but it turned out she was plotting against me instead. Although the chieftain did not answer them, he indirectly admitted that he conspired against them. Kiran's blood was boiling. If that was the case, did that mean they had been conspiring against the York family even before they were wiped out? Perhaps the York family was forced to either accept Yvonne as their bride or end their bloodline. Who was behind this? Why must he marry Yvonne? Kiran looked at her out of the corner of his eye. Her beautiful face, almond-shaped eyes, long eyelashes, high nose bridge, and plump lips. She was a gorgeous woman who could easily find someone to marry. Why must she get married to him? Most importantly, if she was not the second daughter of the Ludwig family, who was she? Kiran was full of doubts. Enough, the chieftain suddenly uttered with a heavy sense of complexity behind his voice. He looked up abruptly, glancing at Kiran. You will never find the answer you seek. Why? Kiran was disappointed and angry, and his expression was cold. On the one hand, I can't give it to you. On the other hand, there are many things that are not up to me to decide. Even if you kill me, your efforts would be in vain. Kiran was taken aback, but he quickly scoffed at him. Did you think your tricks would work on me? You can choose to believe it or not. The chieftain's voice was flat, and his eyes were getting hazy. Of course, I don't believe you. Kiran looked around the chieftain's home and continued, If you don't tell me the reason behind all of this, I'll make you vanish along with your home. Chapter 502. Kiran, do you think I'll be afraid of your threats? Instead of showing fear, the chieftain sneered. I don't care whether you're afraid or not. If you don't tell me now, you'll die. Kiran's gaze looked murderous. Ha ha. The chieftain laughed. Death? He looked at Kiran and said, We'll find out soon who will prevail. Kiran's gaze was sharp and relentless. The chieftain's narrowed his eyes, and his body's aura surged instantly. He inflated like leavening dough, growing stronger and stronger until the air around him felt like it was solidifying. His power took Kiran by surprise, but he was not afraid. He shielded Yvonne and the others behind him. Meanwhile, Augustus got worried when he saw the chieftain changing, so he plopped onto his knees. Chieftain, don't get us all killed. Chieftain, please don't do this. All the other people from the Maui tribe started kneeling and shouting. Kiran, watch out! Serena thought that the chieftain was going to kill himself and bring Kiran down with him, so she went up to protect Kiran. Yvonne blocked Kiran behind her too. Kiran was surprised. Why do you want things to end like this? As soon as he said that, people dashed over, wanting to stop him. However, the chieftain's body suddenly flew upwards. His momentum alone lifted up the roof of the house with a loud rumble. Everyone was stupefied. A loud explosion emitted from the chieftain's body mid-air, and his blood poured down like rain as he vanished into thin air. It was beyond anyone's imagination. Augustus and the others kneeling on the ground were stunned. Kiran jumped up to catch the remnants of the chieftain's body, but unfortunately there was nothing. Unexpectedly, the chieftain had chosen to end his own life. The scene was silent. As Kiran descended, he felt an indescribable sense of loss. The chieftain would rather commit suicide than tell him the reason, which went to show just how many mysteries were behind this. It was not just him. Nobody else saw that coming too. He thought that the chieftain would fight him to the death. He did not think that he would self-destruct. Kiran! After the chieftain's death, Augustus vented his anger on Kiran. The strength in his body surged, wanting desperately to fight Kiran. Crack! Suddenly, the chieftain's chair broke into pieces. When everyone turned to the sound, they saw a sign on the back of the chair which read, "Augustus will succeed the chieftain." Everyone was shocked by those words. On his way to fight Kiran, Augustus stopped in his tracks. He wanted to avenge the chieftain. He may not be a match for Kiran, but he was not afraid. However, now that the chieftain's will was here, what would happen to the future of Maui if he died? Augustus was in a dilemma. "Chieftain Augustus!" The people of Maui knelt on the ground before Augustus. Augustus clenched his fists, trembling all over. He was enraged and humiliated. "You're not the only one who's suffering from indignity." Kiran's voice sounded all of a sudden. Augustus looked at him glumly. Kiran pointed at the sign. "The chieftain wrote that blood will many years ago." "Blood will?" everyone exclaimed. Augustus flew over and picked up the sign. He saw the black writing on it and realized that it was dried-up blood that had turned black. Was the chieftain the one who had suffered the most? Augustus was at a loss. "The chieftain would rather die to save Maui than tell me the reason." Kiran looked up at the sky, his voice filled with melancholy. He did not get the answer he sought, and most importantly, he did not understand the chieftain. "Maui is safe," Augustus murmured. It was pin-drop silent. "Ghost!" Suddenly someone outside shouted in terror. Chapter 503. Augustus dashed outside, and his eyes widened in shock. James, who was dead, and Cade and Vernon, both critically injured, were standing with red eyes and walked toward him. "Are they under the zombie spell?" Augustus exclaimed. He was shocked once again when he turned around. The other people Kiran had just killed also stood up one after another and walked toward the living people as if they wanted to kill them. Has the zombie spell gone crazy? Augustus turned around to punch the corpses. Bam, bam, bam. The corpses fell to the ground but immediately got up again as if they had no sense of pain. "Augustus, watch out!" someone warned. Augustus felt a powerful aura coming from behind him. If he ran away now, he could easily save himself, but the people behind him would die. As the new chieftain, Augustus could not do it. He took a deep breath and said, "Myriad Snake Array." While shouting, he used both the Myriad Snake Array and the divination armor to attack, hoping to repel the corpses behind him. Bang, bang, bang! There were loud bangs in the air, and Augustus felt a powerful force coming his way. He felt a chill down his spine when he realized that the corpses were not fazed at all. He looked back and saw the corpses of James, Cade, and Vernon all running toward him like devils. The people of Maui were in utter shock. They looked like they were fearing for Augustus. Augustus was in despair, but he did not run. He continued attacking, but he had exhausted his strength. In his desperation, Augustus was willing to sacrifice himself and bring the corpses down with him. Bam! Just then, a loud firecracker explosion sounded behind him. Augustus's energy immediately decreased. He turned back and saw Kiran retracting his hand as James's body blew up and scattered in the air. The corpses of Cade and Vernon were sent flying. Augustus let out a long breath and used it to attack the corpses in the house. Wham, bam! With 2 explosions, 2 other corpses were destroyed. Augustus was about to eliminate the remaining corpses when Yvonne said, "That won't work." Augustus stopped in his tracks and calmed himself. Do they really want the corpses to go on a rampage? Where did these corpses come from? Maxwell asked in bewilderment. Kasim did it, Yvonne explained. Kasim. Everyone was shocked. Kiran killed him, but the zombie spell resurrected him, and he dug up Fiona's grave. Yvonne recalled seeing Kasim's resurrection, and she went pale from the fear. How could that be? Everyone was in astonishment. How did he do it? Someone asked in surprise. Our main focus right now is to find out how to get rid of the zombie spell. If we don't, the corpses will just reappear again and again, Serena said. Buzz! Yvonne's head was spinning. She finally understood why Kasim dug up Fiona's grave. He wanted Fiona's corpse to be under the zombie spell. If the zombie spell resurrected Fiona, how terrifying would that be? With that thought in mind, she quickly looked at Kiran and said, I know why the chieftain chose to die like that. Kiran was still relatively calm. When he heard Yvonne's words, he became even calmer as a plausible explanation emerged in his mind. The chieftain was afraid of the zombie spell outbreak. How terrifying could the zombie spell be? It did not seem that powerful when he was killing corpses at Barak's house. How did it become so powerful all of a sudden? Where was the charm? There was a brief silence as the corpses slowly approached them. There was danger coming from all directions. Kiran took out a silver needle and pricked the middle finger of his right hand. Immediately, a stream of blood spurted toward Vernon's body. Vernon's zombie-like body sluggishly shifted to the side and the blood spurted onto his arm. Kiran expected the corpse to be annihilated, but nothing happened. When Maxwell saw that, he quickly told him, "Mr. Kiran, this isn't going to work anymore." "Everyone gather up!" Kiran shouted and stepped in front to block everyone. He swung his hands, sending the corpses flying backward onto the ground. However, like unfeeling robots, they got up and walked toward them again. Augustus stood next to Kian and looked at him. "Is someone controlling all of this?" "The chieftain has lost control over the zombie spell, so he chose to die," said Kiran. Augustus was shocked to hear Kiran's explanation. "If he had written the blood will, making me his successor, does that mean he had known about it a long time ago?" Kiran nodded. "When he cast the love spell on me, he thought that he could control it, but it turned out that he couldn't. What are we going to do?" Augustus practiced and studied martial arts every day, but he had no idea what to do in situations like this. Kiran looked around him and was suddenly reminded of the basement the chieftain was in. "Everyone, go into the basement." Suddenly, it hit everyone too. Augustus turned on the switch for the basement, and it slowly opened up. Just as everyone was about to go down, the ground that Cade and Vernon were standing on opened up too, and because of their inflexibility, they fell into the hole. Kiran was stunned for a moment, but he quickly ordered Augustus, "I'll go down, so you close it." "Alone?" Augustus was shocked. "You stay above here and deal with the emergency with Yvonne," Kiran ordered. "I'll go with you." Yvonne jumped down first. "Stupid woman," Kiran angrily muttered. He was worried about Yvonne's safety, so he immediately jumped down too. Knowing that Kiran wanted to destroy the zombies alone in the basement, Augustus had a newfound admiration for Kiran. He quickly closed the basement door. "Kiran!" Serena ran over worriedly, but the door was already closed. Augustus looked at Maxwell and the others and said, "Go out and protect the Maui tribe." Maxwell and the others nodded immediately as Augustus led them out. Meanwhile, Kiran was now underground. There were flaming torches on the stone wall. What surprised him the most was that Vernon and the others were not attacking him and Yvonne at all. "What's going on?" Yvonne asked curiously. "There are people inside," Kiran said, following behind. Yvonne held his hand. "How are we going to get rid of the zombie spell? How would I know?" "You're the saintess," Kiran said to Yvonne. "Of course you know," Yvonne said to him firmly. Chapter 504. Kiran stopped in his tracks and frowned at Yvonne while asking thoughtfully, "Do you really have an idea?" "I'm your woman for the rest of my life anyway. If you want to continue living like this, so be it," said Yvonne as she continued walking. "I only love snow." "Did I say I had a problem with that?" Yvonne's pale face showed disappointment. "Besides, you said that I can't have children with my health condition. If that's the case, why can't you just let me be your woman?" "Union of man and woman? Have you forgotten Lillian?" Kiran said while walking. "Of course I haven't, but the two of you have the threads of fate, so maybe it'll be okay," Yvonne continued. "I will never resort to that method." Kiran continued walking. Yvonne watched Kiran's back in disappointment, but she soon recollected herself. "Suit yourself! Catch!" Yvonne suddenly shouted at Kiran. Kiran turned his head and, whoosh, Yvonne's body flew toward him like a cannonball. "What are you doing?" Kiran was annoyed. He did not think that now was the time to flirt. Seeing as she was about to fall, Yvonne quickly took out the porcelain vase that contained the fatal poison. Kiran knew that the fatal poison from Fiona's grave was important, so he quickly reached out to catch her. Yvonne's fragile body lunged toward Kiran's. Kiran did not dodge her, nor did he not notice the resentment or the anger in Yvonne's eyes. Just as Kiran was about to help her up, Yvonne touched Kiran's chest's pressure point. Kiran felt the energy and blood in his body becoming stagnant. He was also having difficulty breathing. He quickly looked at Yvonne and asked, "What are you doing?" "Kiran, tell me, how am I inferior to Snow?" Yvonne ignored the corpses walking in front and asked Kiran. "It has nothing to do with this. My love for Snow is the product of the relationship between the Xander family and the York family." After saying that, he took a deep breath and tried to move, but he soon realized that it was impossible. He looked even more furious now. "Let me go. Kiran, I'm living a meaningless life right now. Let's just die together in here." Yvonne shed tears and looked at Kiran pitifully. Let me go now." Kiran tried his luck to get out, but he could not do it. "If Lillian can control the fatal poison and let you suffer, I can do the same by controlling the love spell. You can make a choice now." Yvonne was being unreasonable, but she persisted. When Kiran heard the word control, he remembered the last time he was tortured by Lillian, and his head was spinning. He was cursing inwardly. What kind of poison was in him? "Kiran, don't feel wronged. Lillian and I are just two miserable women who are tied to you, yet we can't have you. You only love Snow, and you won't even give us hope. In that case, we can just die. Yvonne's eyes were brimming with tears, and she sounded like she was in despair. What the hell are you doing? Kiran shouted louder, seeing as the corpses were getting further and further away. Promise me one thing. Yvonne looked at him pleadingly. Say it! Kiran's eyes were almost popping out of his head. Tell me you love me. Yvonne looked at Kiran with tearful eyes full of anticipation. Kiran's anger vanished. He looked at her while trembling. Is that really necessary? Yvonne nodded firmly. Yes, I'm just waiting for you to say those words. I only love snow. What difference does it make even if I say that to you 100 times? Then, can you say it 3 times? Yvonne smiled expectantly. You... Seeing how much he was looking forward to it, Kiran's eyes softened. 3 times! Yvonne stretched out 3 beautiful fingers in front of him. Kiran had no choice. Keeping the zombie spell under control was his main priority right now, so he took a deep breath and said, I love you! Annoyed and anxious, he shouted 3 items in a row. Kiran's voice was resounding, and it echoed in the basement for a long time. Just as he was about to speak, "Feft," Yvonne could not help but laugh happily. Hurry up and unblock my pressure points, Kiran shouted anxiously. Were you saying I love you to the air or the stone wall? Yvonne stared at him with her beautiful eyes. You should be shouting like this, Kiran, I love you. Yvonne shouted 3 times with her sweet voice, but tears were streaming down her face. Kiran looked at the delicate Yvonne and felt an indescribable pang of sadness. She was a victim, too. He never planned to have any connection to her. He thought she was just a passerby in his life. He was overwhelmed with sympathy and heartache. Yvonne, I love you, he shouted 3 more times. Wah! Yvonne burst into tears of joy, running over to hug Kiran and kiss him on the lips. Kiran could not move, so he could only succumb to it. Looking at her tear-stained cheeks, he was deeply moved. Suddenly, Yvonne bit his lips hard, making him bleed. Kiran was confused, but Yvonne was already forcefully sucking his blood. Then she opened the porcelain vase and drank the fatal poison. If you do this, there's no turning back. Kiran was shocked that she was using his blood to cast a fatal spell on them. That way, she would be with him in life and death. Yvonne looked at Kiran. The blood of lovers, the seed of true love. What joy is there in life, what fear in death? Kiran, I don't know who I am or where I come from, but I've known ever since I was a child that I was meant to be with you. I've lived over 20 years for you and endured the pain of the love spell. Now, I never want to be separated from you, in life or in death. Yvonne looked resolute until the very last word. She touched Kiran, and he regained his freedom. Yvonne made a gagging sound, and she suddenly coughed up blood. She caught the blood in her hand and mixed it with an unknown poison. She grabbed Kiran's hand in hers and said, This is the blood of true love. With the combination of the fatal poison and zombie spell, we can control the corpses. You silly woman! Kiran hugged her. Your hug is enough for me. Yvonne was weak. Kiran knew about this method of controlling the corpses. By restraining the fatal poison and disrupting the love spell within the zombie spell, they could kill the resurrected zombies and stop the spread of the zombie spell. The simplest way of developing the blood of true love was through the union of man and woman. Since he disagreed, Yvonne resorted to using this life and death method. Kiran could not understand the woman. Go on, I won't die yet. Yvonne's voice was weak. Kiran nodded. He wanted to carry Yvonne with him, but she refused. Chapter 505. Go on! If I go, I'll only drag you down, Yvonne said. Seeing as she was so weak, Kiran was worried about the dangers that lie ahead, so he nodded and said, Take care of yourself. Thank you for caring, Yvonne forced a smile and said calmly. Kiran tidied her messy hair, and without another word, he quickly chased after Vernon and the other dead bodies. Yvonne watched him leave with an expression that was all over the place. Finally, it turned into a happy smile. The blood of lovers, the seed of true love. What joy was there in life, what fear in death. Yvonne felt bitter inside, but it was only through experiencing true love and guarding that love that she understood the hardships that came with it. It was no longer a matter of describing the love she had for Kiran, but how she was going to face everything. She had already made up her mind to either live or die with the man who would never love her in this lifetime. Of course, the main reason she used the fatal poison was because she wanted to become independent like Lillian. I'm sorry, Kiran. Yvonne sat cross-legged and began adjusting her body. The fatal poison she ingested began to sprout in her body. As the saintess, she was not particularly proficient in black magic, but having studied the love spell for so long, she knew quite a bit about the fatal poison. Kiran sprinted to catch up with Vernon and the other corpses. Suddenly, it hit him. What if Yvonne had consumed the zombie spell charm? Seeing as he could not find the zombie spell charm and the method she used to undo the poison in him, could that be the case? Kiran's head was buzzing. However, he did not have the time to ponder about it. He had to get rid of the corpses first. Kiran quickly caught up to them, but he did not attack because he wanted to see where these corpses would go. Usually, these corpses would approach the living and turn them into corpses as well. They kept walking. He was starting to wonder how long the passage in the basement was. After God knows how long, Kiran felt that it was getting darker, but it seemed familiar. To be precise, he smelled the fragrance of the devil's flower. Could this be the cave where he followed Wesley before? Kiran held back his curiosity and followed closely behind. After walking for a while, the scent got stronger and stronger. Kiran was even more certain now. When the corpses stopped moving, the fragrance of the flowers was the strongest. Kiran turned on the flashlight on his phone and illuminated the surrounding area. It was the cave where he chased after Wesley. The corpses did not respond to the light. They were all looking at the devil's flower. Kiran had confirmed that the chieftain's basement led to this place. After a moment of hesitation, the corpses walked toward the devil's flower and started devouring huge mouthfuls of it. The devil's flower was bright red and juicy looking, making it look like they were drinking blood. It was a terrifying sight. Kiran observed quietly, wanting to see if there were any changes in the corpses. The corpses that had devoured the devil's flower turned red as if their bodies were regenerating blood, resurrecting them. What shocked Kiran the most was that the flower greatly increased their strength. However, Kiran still did not take action as he wanted to see where the corpses would head next. After consuming the devil's flower, they walked out. Kiran followed. As they all walked away, they turned toward the cave's exit. Kiran was surprised that the corpses still had a sense of direction. Kiran continued following without doing anything. When he was about to exit the cave, he saw Yvonne catching up with him. "Are you feeling better?" Kiran asked. "Of course I feel better when my husband cares for me," Yvonne said with a charming smile. Kiran suddenly felt like this woman had changed. Other than the delicate beauty she possessed, there was a new sense of boldness to her. The corpses controlled by the zombie spell ate the devil's flower earlier. "I knew it. It's good that they ate them. If you destroyed them, I would have died. It's not like others can destroy them either." Yvonne returned to her serious expression. Kiran wanted to ask if that was still the case even after he consumed the fatal poison, but he decided against it. They followed the corpses outside, walking over mountains and ridges as if they were being pulled by an invisible rope. While walking behind, Kiran's expression stayed the same, but Yvonne's expression changed. "Is something wrong up front?" Kiran looked at Yvonne and asked. Her face looked even more grave. Her breathing even started to get faster as she was getting more nervous. "Are you still keeping secrets from me?" Kiran was unhappy with her expression. "Kiran, if there's danger, you must escape, even if that means leaving me behind," Yvonne said seriously. "Is that what you think of me?" Kiran scoffed. "I'm not joking." Yvonne became even more serious. Kiran did not say a word, but he refused her. "Kiran, you're the only one left in the York family, so you have to take care of yourself," Yvonne advised him earnestly. "I won't do it no matter what you say." If it were anyone else, Kiran would not have a problem leaving them alone. However, even if he did not love Yvonne, he would not give her up just like that. Seeing as he was not listening to her, Yvonne deliberately provoked him. "Does that mean you love me, but you just don't dare admit it? Don't talk about such trivial matters now." Kiran focused on the corpses in front of him and felt like things were getting even stranger. Just then, Yvonne decided to start acting like a child. "Kiran, tell me, who has a better body, Snow or me?" Kiran was furious. How could she ask something like that at that moment? Was she mad? "Do you think they're looking for the charm?" Yvonne changed the subject, seeing as Kiran was ignoring her. "I think so," Kiran responded. "They're going to find Kasim," Yvonne said confidently. "Is Kasim hiding in the mountains?" Kiran pictured the useless young master, unable to imagine what he would look like after turning into a corpse. "When you see Kasim, you'll notice that he looks different," Yvonne said. "You should have killed him before he was controlled by the zombie spell," Kiran said dissatisfiedly. "He's dead. The problem can't be solved. Do you want to come to Maui again to solve it?" Yvonne smiled. "What do you mean?" Kiran was confused. "They're going to a place called Blood Cavern," Yvonne said while looking in the direction of the corpses. "Where's that?" Kiran asked curiously. "Kiss me and I'll tell you," Yvonne said with a smile. Chapter 506. Kiran glared at Yvonne. "It's useless to seduce me this way. On the contrary, you're only changing the way I see you." "How do you see me?" Yvonne looked at him playfully with curiosity in her beautiful eyes. "At first, you were a beautiful sick patient. How about now?" "Undecipherable. Most importantly, your temperament has changed drastically." Kiran stared at Yvonne and said seriously. Yvonne chuckled. "It's not my temperament that changed." "What is it then?" "I just understand now." "Understand what?" If I don't try, I'll never get the chance. Since I'm already under the love spell with you, why not give it a try? Even if you love snow, there's still a chance you might give me some of your love, no? Kiran was speechless, so he simply ignored her. Can't a woman's innocence and naivety sway you? Then there was resentment in Yvonne's eyes. When I was in Maui, I was a bright and cheerful woman. After I went to the Quins, I began to adapt to that kind of life. I was afraid that people would find out that I'm not from the Quinn family, so I was quiet all the time. After pausing for a moment, she continued, After that, I found out that my other half was still alive. Not knowing that you did not like me, I ended up becoming a resentful woman. Sigh. As a resentful woman with poor health, doesn't that make me a sick patient? Her words reminded Kiran to ask her why she went to the Quins back then. Before he could say more, Yvonne put her fingers on his lips. I'll tell you my secret in a bit. You should pay attention to the blood cavern first. What's the blood cavern? Kiran suppressed his curiosity and asked. Do you want to know a legend about the place? Yvonne asked seriously. What legend? Kiran asked. They say that the cavern is red inside because it's protected by gods. That's why many people went inside. However, none of them returned. Yvonne pondered for a moment and said gravely, I've also heard of another legend. What is it? They said that the blood cavern is paradise on earth. Huh? Kiran got curious. The name itself gave him an eerie feeling. How could it be paradise on earth? The blood cavern is hidden deep in the mountains, isolated from the rest of the world. The stones inside are all red. It's so breathtaking that they call it paradise on earth. When Kiran heard that, he was suddenly reminded of the red dragon Jade. Could it be a different mountain range? He subconsciously looked toward Mount Mordor as it somehow seemed connected to it. Yvonne did not know that, but she continued, The people who went in never came back out. They just stayed there for the rest of their lives. How do you know? Kiran found it so bizarre that it was hard to believe. A wry smile appeared on Yvonne's face. When I was 5, my foster parents suddenly left home in the middle of the night. They left? Kiran was curious, so he asked impatiently. Yvonne nodded. I wasn't asleep then, so I heard them say that they were going to Blood Cavern. They wanted to spend the rest of their lives in that paradise. They actually went. Kiran still found it hard to believe. Yvonne nodded. They did. A few years after, I missed them so much that I went to the cavern. Were they still there? Kiran asked. Yvonne nodded. There were many people inside and they were all still alive, but they seemed to have lost their senses. All they did was search for prey all over the mountains and use the blood of their prey to pay tribute to the gods they worshipped in the Blood Cavern. Kiran was stunned when he heard that they lost their memories and senses. What was that like? Humans have 3 souls and 7 spirits. Losing a soul would cause amnesia and forgetfulness, but it varies from person to person. What was going on in Blood Cavern? Kiran was in disbelief. They're quite similar to the corpses. The only thing that's different about them is that they're human and still alive, Yvonne added. Alive? Kiran's gaze was sharp and stern. Yup, Yvonne nodded. Did they lose their souls or spirits? Kiran asked. I just know that they weren't poisoned and that they're still human, but I don't know how. Kiran inhaled the cold air. It was once said that the Blood Cavern was a place where demons went, Yvonne added. Kiran was at a loss. Were there really demons among them? Ah! Yvonne suddenly shouted. What's wrong? Kiran asked hurriedly, holding her in his arms. I want a hug. Hey! Yvonne let out a ringing laughter as she threw herself into his arms. Kiran felt that her body was colder than before. She had obviously scared herself by talking about that stuff. He carried her up with both his hands under her buttocks. Yvonne naturally wrapped her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, pressing herself against Kiran like a little girl in her father's arms. Kiran, remember that we have the fatal poison now, so theoretically we may be able to survive without the other. If there's any danger, I want you to stay alive, Yvonne whispered next to Kiran's ear. Kiran held Yvonne's legs tighter and said tenderly, Everything will be fine when I'm here. Yvonne kept quiet, but she had mixed feelings. She did not even know who she was. Her love for Kiran was like a tsunami that could not be stopped. When she was reminded of her identity and everything else, she was at a loss. Unaware of her inner thoughts, Kiran simply followed the dead bodies with her. After more than 2 hours of trekking, they finally came to the Blood Cavern. It was a basin surrounded by mountains. It was sparsely populated, and there was no mobile phone signal. As soon as they arrived, they saw the corpses speeding up. They were stunned. Did they discover something? With Yvonne in his arms, he quickly followed. Soon they were met with a shocking sight. Qasim was sitting on a high platform with countless people kneeling on the ground before him. Yes, people! However, they soon noticed that there were figures standing around the people who were kneeling. When they looked more closely, they saw these figures were not human at all. They were actually dead bodies. Did he kill the people who disobeyed him? Before Kiran could take a closer look, he felt teardrops on his face. He looked up and saw that Yvonne had begun to cry. Chapter 507. If Kiran had seen the scene before him anywhere else, he would have thought that he was hallucinating. It was unimaginable. How could the dead rule over people? However, the sight before him proved otherwise because a corpse was literally ruling over people. The black magic in Maui was bizarre indeed. Even with his outstanding medical knowledge, he could not decipher this mystery. He looked at Yvonne crying and asked, "Are your foster parents dead?" Yvonne nodded. "They're dead." She looked toward the northeast corner and saw a middle-aged man and woman standing on the spot without any expression on their faces, as if Kasim himself sculpted them. However, they bore no resemblance to Yvonne. If Yvonne had not mentioned them, he never would have guessed that she knew them. "What are they doing?" Kiran asked curiously. "I don't know." Yvonne got down from him, but she was still weak and almost fell. Fortunately, Kiran caught her in time. Kiran held onto her hand, which was icy cold from the shock. Kiran gripped her hand hard, transferring his energy to her while looking at the scene before him. Vernon and the other corpses went over quickly and bowed to Kasim like loyal dogs surrendering to their master. They simply lowered their heads without saying a word. Just as Kiran was about to go closer, someone shouted, "Stop! Dove!" Kiran and Yvonne looked over and saw an old man dressed in Maui clothes. Both of them were momentarily stunned. They did not expect anyone to be here, nor did they even notice him. "Who are you?" Yvonne asked hurriedly. "Don't ask me who I am. Leave now. This place isn't for people like you," the other person spoke coldly. Kiran was about to say something when suddenly several more people appeared next to him, all dressed the same. Each of them looked strong and seemed to have firearms on them. What surprised both of them the most was that they had already set up a red circle, meticulously arranged in the formation of the divination armor. "It's Saintess Yvonne," another old man came over and said to Yvonne. However, everyone ignored his words. They still looked as arrogant and imposing as ever. "Sean, what are you doing here?" Yvonne recognized him as the person responsible for managing the daily affairs in Maui. Although Maui had a chieftain and a saintess, it was still an administrative location, so they had specific people to manage the area. "I heard that a murder happened in Maui. I wanted to investigate it, so here I am." Sean Zimmer did not say anything else. He looked at Kiran, knowing that he was the one who killed Kasim. As the manager of the area, taking care of a situation like this was incredibly annoying. In short, Kiran had given him more work. Yvonne heard the dissatisfaction in his tone, so she took Kiran's hand and said, "Sean, this is my husband. Kasim committed a crime by digging up Saintess Fiona's grave, so he got angry. She did not want any bad blood between the two parties. If there was a problem, the people in charge should take care of it." "You can't just kill him." Sean sounded angry. They were clearly trying to say that they could handle the situation themselves. Yvonne was a little flustered by his attitude, so she apologized. "Sean, please forgive us." "Are you sure you can solve it?" Kiran was unconvinced from the start, so he asked them coldly after hearing Yvonne's apology. "What are you trying to say?" Sean did not think Kiran would dare talk back, so he snapped back angrily. "I don't mean anything else, I'm just genuinely asking." "Don't be mad." Kiran smiled half-heartedly and responded to Sean. "Saintess Yvonne, I think it's best if you and him leave the blood cavern." "You shouldn't be here," Sean ordered them to leave. "What gives you the right to be here then?" Kiran asked bluntly. Sean was annoyed by Kiran's repeated retorts. He looked at him disdainfully and said, "I've heard about you. If you're that strong, why did you let Vernon and the others come here? If you're that powerful, why did you let Kasim get even more powerful and come to Blood Cavern? Maui was peaceful and harmonious before you came. Now that you're here, the place is in chaos and we have to clean up after your mess. If you're here to cause trouble, you should just leave." Sean spoke again with a hint of sarcasm. His words were unpleasant to hear. Yvonne held on to Kiran, worried that he would get mad. Kiran looked at the people Sean brought. He was not angry, nor did he fight back. On the contrary, he still felt like he was watching a show. All he wanted to do was watch those people put on a show. Watching clowns embarrassing themselves was entertaining. With his power, he could wipe them all out, but if they insisted on showing what they got, Kiran was happy to oblige. Kiran could not care less about what he said. He had already killed Kasim, so who was he to talk big in front of Kiran? Kiran looked down on these people, and that gave him the confidence to act arrogant. Sean was not happy with Kiran's response, so he pointed behind him. "I forgot to tell you that I invited the flower girl from Westbrook." As soon as he said that, a gorgeous woman with a voluptuous figure and fair skin appeared in front of them. The woman exuded a formidable aura just by standing there. Most importantly, there was a wickedness about her that made her stand out. The flower girl is famous in Westbrook for exorcism. She has the ability to remotely control the corpses. Sean merely touched on what she was capable of, which made her all the more mysterious. When Kiran heard that Westbrook's exorcist, the flower girl, was here, he was startled. Her exorcism powers were out of this world. The flower girl's expertise in exorcism had become somewhat legendary. Yvonne was clearly surprised to see that they invited such an outstanding person. Westbrook's exorcist was the obvious answer in this situation. The flower girl's tip-top methods were the best solution. Sean's arrangement seemed flawless, and even scientifically proven. Anyone with common sense would back away and avoid confrontation altogether because anyone would be a novice compared to her. Of course, Kiran was the exception. Chapter 508. Sean did not see it that way. Instead, he was angrier at him than ever before. In Sean's eyes, Kiran was incomparable to Barak. Barak was the richest man in Maui with tons of assets. His assets could have helped Sean achieve success, but unfortunately, Kiran ruined all of it, which was what made him so mad. Now, he wanted to redeem himself by resolving the matter in Blood Cavern and turning the situation around. Kiran may be powerful, but he was irrelevant now that he had the flower girl. "Leave now, young man." The flower girl looked at Kiran with desire in her eyes, making no effort to hide her admiration for his good looks. Even so, her tone was full of pride. Feeling as if a dead person was staring at him, Kiran felt so uncomfortable that his hair was standing on end. The flower girl was pleased to see his reaction to her gaze, so she continued, "The Blood Cavern is a mysterious place. Even I'm not completely confident. If you walk in there, you're practically walking into a death trap. Those who have been affected by the zombie spell have no sense of fear. They haven't even reached their full potential yet, but they're already killing machines." A sinister smile crept onto her seductive face as she stared at Kiran's handsome looks. "I can see that your death is near, young man. You better beware." Sean and the others were pleased to hear the flower girl's words, but Yvonne's expression sank. How dare she jinx him? More importantly, how dare she try to steal her man? Just as Yvonne was about to speak, Kiran spoke first. "I can foresee your death too. I'm certain you're in for a catastrophe today." Kiran gave the flower girl a half smile. "Ooh." A cold gleam flashed in the flower girl's eyes. How dare he cast a bad omen on her by saying such things? She was about to explode in anger. Although she dealt with corpses every day, especially for the exorcists of Westbrook, mentioning death was a huge taboo for them. The flower girl remained still. Although there was no wind, everyone felt a chilling breeze sweep across them. Even with their extraordinary powers, they could not help but shudder at the sudden overwhelming pressure looming over them. Kiran continued staring calmly at the flower girl. "You youngsters think you're so great," Sean sneered, dispelling the tension. He looked at Kiran mockingly and said, "If you think you're so great, you must recognize what true power really is, right? Watch your words in front of the flower girl of Westbrook, or be prepared to face the consequences. If you had what it takes to kill the corpses controlled by the zombie spell, why would you let them come all the way here?" Yvonne wanted to explain, but Kiran held her back. "If you think you can do it, go on." Yvonne was surprised that Kiran did not fight back. Kiran looked at the flower girl and shook his head. "I don't think you're able to handle the situation, let alone kill the corpses controlled by Kasim's zombie spell." "Oh?" Sean was taken aback by his response, so he snapped back, "If she can't, what makes you think you can?" Sure, Kiran was powerful, but there were a ton of strange creatures in the vast mountains of Maui. If the flower girl could not get rid of the corpses, Kiran did not stand a chance. Kiran must not know his place for speaking so shamelessly. Just as Yvonne was about to explain, Sean and the flower girl left as they could not be bothered to interact with them any longer. Kiran watched the flower girl's seductive back and said, "Flower girl, don't forget about the catastrophe that awaits you. Beware of turning into a withered flower." Chapter 509. Instead of refuting him, she simply turned around and shot him a flirty smile, somehow making her look even more eerie. "Young man, I'll make you regret letting those words come out of your mouth." The flower girl licked her fiery red lips. Kiran was not threatened at all. "We'll see about that." Yvonne was worried about Kiran falling for the flower girl's tricks, so she quickly asked, "Can you really read one's fortune?" Kiran almost burst out laughing. He looked at Yvonne and said, "If I could tell fortunes, I would have calculated how many children's snow and I would have in the future and found a way to make it happen." Yvonne rolled her eyes at him. "You're so immature. I'm jealous now." Kiran did not expect her to admit it so boldly. He simply shook his head without explaining. He had dabbled in divination before, but he had never used it on himself because he firmly believed that he was the creator of his destiny. Besides, people who practiced fortune-telling only did it to reveal God's plans. It was best for him to stay away from these things. Why disrupt the will of heaven? Plus, people's fortunes were constantly changing. Blindly following one's fortune was the same as just awaiting one's death. Kiran was sensible enough not to do such meaningless things. Yvonne actually wanted to find out about her future with Kiran, but she was too embarrassed to tell him that, so she decided not to. Kiran looked in the direction of Sean and the flower girl and said with certainty, "They'll encounter a disaster." Yvonne was shocked. Was the flower girl going to fail to get rid of Kasim and the others? Kiran held her hand to comfort her while they stood there, watching Sean and the others get busy. Kiran was not worried at all. If someone else wanted to die, that was their business. Trying to reason with stubborn people was difficult anyway. Besides, Kasim and the others were trying to get stronger. If they were already hard to deal with now, how difficult would it be when they got stronger? It was a no-brainer. Dealing with the demonic zombie spell was not going to be easy. From the first time they encountered it until now, they had no control over the spell or the poison. It was evident how quickly things changed. Most importantly, they did not even know where the charm was. How could the flower girl defeat them alone? Did they think that the corpses were that useless? Kiran turned to look at Yvonne and said, "Do you think the zombie spell in our bodies will mutate and turn us into them?" "No way." Yvonne shuddered and subconsciously gripped his hand tighter in fear. "Why does it seem to me that your saintess title is just for show?" Kiran could not help but laugh when he saw her clueless face. "I was raised as a child bride for the York family and for you to take home and sleep with, not to practice black magic." Yvonne regained her composure and replied while pouting. "Should I use my divination skills to foretell my luck with women?" Kiran teased. "Forget it. Why? The proof is right here." "Pfft!" Yvonne burst out laughing. She had completely calmed down now. She was just happy to be with Kiran. "The zombie spell will mutate, so just keep an eye on it. It may get harder to control," Kiran said solemnly after seeing her calm down. Yvonne had a serious expression, but she was grateful to Kiran for caring about her. In reality, she was already aware that it might mutate. If it really did mutate, it would be terrifying. Chapter 510. 15 minutes later, Sean and the flower girl had finished setting up. Next, the flower girl led Sean and his men inside. It seemed like she was not afraid of the corpses at all. She walked in calmly with a spirit-summoning flag in her left hand and a rattle drum in her right hand. Their appearance caused a commotion below. The people who were still alive all looked at them and were going to get up. The flower girl lifted her left hand and reflected the sunlight into their eyes with the spirit-summoning flag. Their bodies went numb, and eventually they plopped onto the ground as if their souls had left their bodies. With a smug look on his face, Sean watched as the flower girl raised the spirit-summoning flag, causing everyone to fall unconscious and leaving only the dead bodies standing. He even turned to shoot Kiran and Yvonne a look of disdain. Vernon and the other corpses suddenly moved. Instead of attacking the flower girl, they started gathering. It seemed normal at first, but soon a shocking and repulsive scene appeared before Kiran and the others. They started biting and devouring each other. Kasim sat on top, smiling proudly. Yvonne's already cold hands became even colder. She squeezed Kiran's hands and leaned her body closer to his. If she did not have to see what was going on, she would not have looked down. The sight was too cruel and bloody. Yes, bloody. They were already dead and drained of blood, but when they bit into each other, blood splattered everywhere. Under the sun, the sight of blood splattering made it look like hell on earth. "The red devil's flower can turn into blood?" Kiran asked curiously. "I didn't know either," Yvonne said, suppressing the urge to gag. When the flower girl saw the situation in front of her, she was not afraid. Instead, there was joy and excitement in her eyes as if she were a hunter who had found her prey. She did not stop them, but she just stood there and watched. Unlike her, some people could not stand the sight of it, so they turned their heads and vomited. As time passed, only 2 corpses were left, Vernon and Cade. They looked blankly at Kasim, waiting for his orders. The entire scene was incredibly gory. Yvonne helplessly watched as her foster parents, who turned into corpses, were being eaten. "Eat some more," the flower girl said excitedly as she looked at the 2 corpses in front of her. Vernon and Cade turned to look at the flower girl as if they heard her. However, she showed no fear. On the contrary, her charming face was filled with excitement, as if she was expecting them to continue eating each other. Ooh. The 2 corpses jumped up and attacked the flower girl as if they were still living people. Unafraid, the flower girl still had a smug smile on her face. She waved the spirit-summoning flag up and down 3 times and chanted some words. Suddenly, the flag turned bright red like the Red Sea opening its bloody mouth, waiting for Vernon and Cade to attack. The 2 corpses continued to charge forward without a trace of fear. Bang! There was a sudden explosion in the air, and the surroundings of Vernon and Cade turned bright red as they flew backward. The flower girl did not move. but everyone around her flew back too. Kiran's eyes were fixated on the spirit summoning flag's attack, and it seemed like spirits were shooting out of it, piercing Vernon and Cade like sharp arrows. Although they were not injured, they were still trapped. The flower girl seemed to know her stuff. Kiran praised her inwardly. However, he still did not believe that she would win this fight. Besides, the final boss was Kasim. The two corpses quickly launched their second and third attacks. Their attacks were brutal and straightforward, and so were the flower girl's counterattacks. Vernon and Cade's attacks were in vain, and they were seriously injured. However, the power of the flower girl's spirit summoning flag got weaker after being attacked. Rumble. Suddenly, the spot where Kasim was sitting made a noise and collapsed instantly, and he floated in the air. The temperature in the blood cavern dropped, and the aura of death seemed to wither the plants and the trees around them. Kasim was finally taking matters into his own hands. Kasim's movements were fast. Before Vernon and Cade could react, Kasim grabbed them in each hand. Heh. Vernon and Cade made sounds as if they were crying in pain, but it quickly stopped. Soon, their bodies shrank, and they turned into dust. Ow! Kasim let out a sharp roar, looking up like a tiger that had just woken up. His eyes and body were scarlet red, seemingly several times stronger than before. He stood there like the god of death while the plants around him began to freeze and die. Animal! The flower girl shouted and jumped up, attacking Kasim forcefully. She raised the spirit summoning flag in the air, and it turned bright red again, emanating a lethal aura. As she descended, the flag in her right hand was aimed toward Kasim. Kasim's surroundings were shrouded in a red glow that was so dazzling it almost looked like fireworks. Clang! The crisp sound of metal hitting sounded. There was also a crackling sound around them. With a loud rumble, the ground instantly collapsed. Those who were unconscious from the spirit summoning flag started waking up. They looked around them as if they were waking up from a dream, feeling embarrassed and shocked. Before they could even react, Kasim's eyes glowed red as he lifted his hands to cast a red glow on those people, killing them instantly. He's too cruel, Yvonne muttered. Kiran could tell what Kasim's purpose was, and he could tell that the flower girl did not stop him at all. In her eyes, those people's lives did not matter. Kiran knew that even if these people were alive, they would basically live as zombies. Even if they sobered up, they might not be able to accept reality. Perhaps it was best for them to leave this world while they were still in a dream. The people who died turned into corpses and attacked the flower girl. The flower girl's attacks were not as sharp as they were earlier. She even showed moments of hesitation. Finally, she turned to Sean's men and said, "It's your turn to attack."